If the Buckeyes get off to a slow start, will their fans turn on them? This has been a question that's been asked time and time and time again. Hello and welcome to Always College Football. Today is Wednesday, December 18th, and we appreciate you being with us here at your destination for the best and most comprehensive breakdowns that you'll find here this college football playoff season. I'm your host, Greg McElroy. Welcome to ACF. If you are new to the show, please hit us up on the podcast platforms. Whatever one you choose is up to you, totally fine. But you can like, you can rate, you can subscribe. We really appreciate the support you've shown the show. If you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube page, you can also check out our other content. We're here multiple days a week, and we think we cover the sport as in-depth as anyone going. So you're going to appreciate, I think, the breakdowns that we give you today. For those of you that are watching and seeing that I'm not normally wearing my polo, I'm usually wearing a polo of some sort, maybe a hoodie. I'm bundled up. That's because I am en route to South Bend, Indiana, here momentarily, where I will be calling the game on Friday night alongside Sean McDonough and Molly McGrath, Indiana at Notre Dame. So very much looking forward to being on the call for the first ever home playoff game. Should be really exciting. But before we get into some of these individual breakdowns, a few things at the conference level that we need to account for. Let's start in the ACC. SMU has punched their ticket. They joined Clemson and Florida State as the third permanent ACC school to reach the college football playoff. Now, Notre Dame did make it back in 2020. That was representing the ACC, but they're not a traditional ACC school. So ACC now has 17 members. They have had 3 teams make the CFP, SMU, Clemson, and Florida State. In the Big Ten, this year they've had 2 teams punch their ticket for the very first time. Penn State became the 6th, and then Indiana, who was named just a couple minutes after Penn State, became the 7th current Big Ten schools to reach the CFP. Ohio State, Michigan have both made it 5 and 3 times respectively. Michigan State made it back in 2015. Pretty interesting. You also have Oregon and Washington. You're going to sit there and say, hang on a second, what? Yes, Oregon was there before. Washington's made it twice. Those are now Big Ten teams. So Penn State and Indiana, 6th and 7th out of the 18 team league that is the Big Ten to have punched their ticket to the playoff. In the SEC, Tennessee is in for the very first time. They're the 6th SEC team to make the CFP. They joined Alabama, Georgia, Texas, LSU, and Oklahoma. The previous 5 teams account for 20 college football playoff appearances. So very interesting with what's gone on there in the SEC. 6 out of the 16 have made it, including the 2 that we're joining this year. Texas is in as well. That's their 2nd straight year to make the college football playoff. And the Big 12, pretty fun. TCU's made it before. We've seen that. Baylor almost made it back in the day. They hadn't, but almost made it back in the day. This year, it's Arizona State who punches their ticket. A couple others that have been close there in the Big 12 but haven't quite gotten over the hump. That would be Utah. That would be BYU. That would be Colorado this year, a few that have gotten close, but one that did, even UCF, by the way, very close for them. But guess who did make the playoff? That'd be Cincinnati. So Cincinnati in there as well. So there have been 3 teams from the Big 12 that have made the playoff in the past. It's weird to think about all this realignment, how things have changed, right? And then finally, last but certainly not least, we give some love to the G5 in the Mountain West. Boise State becomes the first Mountain West team to make the college football playoff. They joined Cincinnati, now of the Big 12. They joined the AAC, the American Athletic Conference, as the only G5 league to put a team through the postseason. So just a little historical thing. We're keeping track. Yes, we're keeping track. How many teams from your league have made it? Yes, we keep track, and we'll do so annually. But now let's kick things off with a dive into some of these matchups. We have some great games to look forward to this weekend. We will preview all 4. And we'll do a deep dive and answer some of the questions that could determine the outcome next on Always College Football. Indiana travels to South Bend, Indiana. The game is going to be played 8 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday night. This will be on ABC. Notre Dame currently about a 7.5-point favorite. The total hovers around 51. Who would have thunk it? The first ever college football playoff game is going to be played between two schools that are separated by about 200 miles. And so in a game between same state opponents, this is also the first time that Notre Dame has played a game at Notre Dame Stadium on a Friday night. These two teams have been super dominant all season long. Now, Notre Dame and Indiana, they have received a little bit of criticism about the level of competition that they've played, but who cares? They're in the field, and what they have done, even though while their strength of schedule numbers maybe not up to snuff of typical college football playoff contenders, look at the level of dominance. Points per game differential. Indiana has beaten teams by an average of 28.7 points. Notre Dame has beaten teams by an average of 26.3 points. That ranks first and second in the FBS in points per game differential. So while they might not have played great teams, they've dominated everyone they've played for the most part, with the exception of Indiana against Ohio State and Notre Dame against NIU. Let's dive into the questions that will determine the outcome, shall we? Question number 1, how did Indiana get here? We'll start with that one, right? Because I do think it's important to tell Indiana's story when evaluating this matchup and why they're here and how they got here and all these other things. Because most people would think, hang on a second, Indiana, how the heck are they a team that finished 4th in the Big Ten in the college football playoff? Well, few different reasons, right? They completely overhauled their roster. This is year number 1 under new head coach Curt Cignetti. They brought in 30 transfers this offseason. That was the most in the Big Ten. And they also, within that 30 transfers, they brought in 13 from James Madison. Now, those James Madison transfers account for 29% of the team's snaps this season. So Curt Cignetti clearly has a system. He wanted to bring guys that were super familiar with the system. So therefore, brings those guys in. They count for nearly a third of the team's snap production. Overall, 77% of the Hoosiers' total starts this year have come from players that have transferred at some point in their career. That's the most in the Big Ten. That's the 6th most in the FBS. And part of the reason why Indiana's here is they didn't really play against top-tier competition. They took players that maybe don't always look the part from a height, weight, size, speed combination. They just took good football players from JMU, they plugged them into the system, and they beat teams that might not have championship caliber players. They went 1-1 against teams that finished with a winning record this season. Indiana faced 2 teams that ranked in the top 15 total defense. That would be Ohio State and Michigan. Those are the only 2 games this season where the Hoosiers were held under 300 yards of offense and they were held under 30 points. So a little bit beneficial, a little bit because the schedule wasn't where it needed to be, that familiarity and that talent gap that might have existed against the top tier competition, it never showcased itself because it never really was forced to showcase itself. That's question number 1. Question number 2, will Notre Dame be able to run the football? Do we really need to ask many questions beyond this one? I mean, this is kind of what's going to determine the game. I mean, if you are unfamiliar with Indiana and you're unfamiliar with Notre Dame, it's going to come down to whether or not Indiana's offensive line or Notre Dame's offensive line can move Indiana's defensive line off the ball. This is good versus good, elite part of the team against elite part of the team. And I think when you take good versus good matchups, whoever wins that good versus good matchup, they're going to be the ones that are likely victorious in the game. Fighting Irish ranked 3rd in yards per carry this season. That's only behind New Mexico and Boise State. Indiana is 2nd in opponents' yards per carry, behind Ole Miss. But part of the reason why Ole Miss is sitting there at the top is because of the amount of sacks that Ole Miss has generated this year. But if you look at it just purely based on designed run plays, nobody has played the run better than Indiana in college football this season. You look at the Fighting Irish, their 1-2 punch at running back, incredible. If you're unfamiliar with Jadarian Price or Jeremiah Love, you're going to love what you see. They each rank in the top 10 nationally in yards per rush after contact, and what they do when they get in the red zone and just pounding the football away. Notre Dame is one of 5 schools to record at least 40 rushing touchdowns this season. Can you name the other 4? Army, probably got that one right. Boise State, Ashton Genty, makes sense. Alabama makes sense, especially with Jalen Milroe accounting for as many rushing touchdowns as he has. Can you get the last one? Jacksonville State. Rich Rod, who's now back at West Virginia, loves to pound the rock. So we know that Notre Dame's going to be a team that's very committed to it, not just with Price and Love, but also with Riley Leonard, who's excellent with his legs, going to probably get you about 9 or 10, maybe 11 carries a game. They're in a design quarterback situation. Indiana, they're allowing just 70.8 rushing yards a game this year. So this is a group that is really stout against the run. They have good personnel along the front, and it's going to be hard for Notre Dame's offensive line to move these guys off the football. Question number 3, can Indiana win in the trenches offensively? So Indiana's offensive line against Notre Dame's defensive line. Indiana's done a pretty good job as far as pressure allowed. They do a decent job in pass protection. They give up pressure on about 24% of their dropbacks. That's bottom 5 in the FBS. So it's not often that Curtis Rourke, their starting quarterback, is under pressure. That's if you look at the entire season. But if you look at it situationally, the first 9 games were really, really good. But you know the difference between the first 9 games and the last 3? They had their starting left guard, Drew Evans, who was out for the year now after he got injured there in the 9th game of the season. And the last 3 games without them hasn't been quite as good. They've taken a pretty significant step back. And 2 of the last 3 teams that they played registered double-digit pressures. Those came against Ohio State and Michigan. Those were by far their 2 worst offensive performances on the season, and really because they didn't do a very good job up front. Let's just call it what it was. Against Ohio State, Indiana allowed pressure on nearly half of their dropbacks. I told you a moment ago, season-long pressure rate is about 24%. Well, against Ohio State, it was 48%. And against Ohio State and Michigan, they had 9 sacks. Against everybody else, 9 sacks in 10 games. 9 against Ohio State and Michigan, 9 in the other 10 games combined. And Notre Dame's one of the best in the country as far as pressuring the opposing quarterback. 47% of their opposing quarterback's dropbacks came under pressure. That's the 2nd highest rate in the FBS behind LSU. So can Indiana hold up along the offensive line against what I think is an excellent Notre Dame defensive front? Question number 4, can Notre Dame force some mistakes? Now, a big reason why the game for Indiana against Ohio State got sideways is because Indiana made a bunch of mistakes in that performance. They fumbled inside their own 20 on a sack fumble. They muffed a punt snap. They allowed a punt return. And Indiana all year has been very clean when it comes to turnovers. They've been smart. They have a veteran quarterback in Curtis Rourke. They have just 8 turnovers this season. That's the 2nd fewest in the FBS behind Vanderbilt. 4 of those 8 turnovers came against Maryland. So 1 game, 4 turnovers. The other 11, just 4 turnovers. So that they did come in bunches once this year. But this is a Notre Dame defense that excels in taking the football away. They've forced 28 this year. That's number 1 in the sport, tied with Texas. That includes 5 pick sixes. 2 came against SC in their most recent game. Both really put the game on ice there at the very end. And those 5 pick sixes are tied with Tulane for the most in the FBS and the most in the season in Notre Dame history. Which says an awful lot about how opportunistic that defense is. Question number 5, can Indiana's run game continue to stay efficient? Justice Ellison and Tyson Lawton, they've each recorded 10 rushing touchdowns. They're one of 4 duos to each have 10-plus rushing touchdowns. Also included in that list, Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame. Now, Curtis Rourke, he really excels when they are sitting there in play action situations. He completes 80% of his passes off play action. They use it quite a bit. About a third of their dropbacks are off play action. So if they can keep the run game efficient with Ellison and Lawton, that'll open up the play action passing game. And that's where Rourke has done a really nice job all season long. Question 6, can Riley Leonard's arm win the game if necessary? Now, dating back to the Navy game on October 26th, Riley Leonard has 10 passing touchdowns against just 2 picks. All right. before that game, it was 6-3 touchdown interception ratio. So during this 5-game stretch, he's been a lot better. He looks a little bit more comfortable. He's also been a lot better throwing it downfield. On throws that travel 20-plus yards downfield in the last 5 games, he's 9 of 15. Well, in the first 7 games, he was just 5 of 18. So much more efficient when pushing it down the field. And Indiana has not been a team that has faced a lot of downfield throws this year. They've faced just 32 and have given up just 8 completions. That's the second fewest in the country. And then question number 7. Curtis Rourke, RPO. He's going to be facing a lot of man coverage. That's what Notre Dame does. They play a ton of man coverage. Can this RPO attack for Indiana force a lot of one-on-ones on the outside? Can they win those one-on-ones? Elijah Surratt has a ton of contested catches. He's going to have to be big, likely working against Christian Gray, who at times got exposed against USC. And then on the other side, will they be able to create matchups with a multitude of different wide receivers? Probably going to be Omar Cooper more than anybody else, working against a true freshman Leonard Moore. So should be really interesting, the cat and mouse game that goes on in this game. It's a fascinating matchup, a trend in the game. Notre Dame and Indiana are both 9-3 against the spread this season, third best in the FBS. Indiana covered the spread by an average of 2 touchdowns. That's the best. And Notre Dame covered by an average of 10.7 points. So these two teams have been great against the spread all season long. I will not make a pick in the game, but we hope that you tune in. This will be Friday night, 8 o'clock Eastern time on ABC. SMU and Penn State will get things kicked off noon Eastern time on TNT and Max. Penn State is about an 8.5 point favorite. The total right around 54. SMU and Penn State, they've met 3 times. This will be the third. It's their first meeting since 1978. Nittany Lions in that game won 26-21. That was at State College. Their first meeting was back in 1948. That was in the Cotton Bowl, and it ended in a 13-13 tie. Unlikely to see a tie in this one. Just saying. Highly unlikely. If you can find a line out there somewhere that will allow you to bet the draw, not sure I would do that. Resist the urge. But historically speaking, Penn State is 1-0-1 against SMU. The Mustangs, by the way, back in that 1948 meeting, Doak Walker was on that SMU team, and he threw a 53-yard touchdown pass while rushing for 66 yards before winning the Heisman Trophy the following year. So pretty interesting matchup, and this should be another matchup of good versus good. Good SMU offense against great Penn State defense. SMU, 6th in the FBS in points per game. It's about 38.5 points a game. Penn State's giving up just 16.4. That's 8th fewest in the FBS. Question number 1. This has been the big question all season long for SMU, by the way. Can SMU hold up in the trenches? Pretty simple question. SMU is in their first year in the Power 5. And Rhett Lashley and their coaching staff did a great job of going out and saying, hey, we got to fortify our offensive and defensive lines. We got to create depth. We got to create size. And we got to make sure that when the ones go out and the twos go in, there's not a huge drop-off. They did a pretty good job of that. But it has ramped up pretty considerably the last couple games. And you look at what they saw against Clemson in the ACC championship game, they gave up an awful lot of pressures to the Clemson Tigers. And Kevin Jennings, he holds the ball. He holds the ball quite a bit. Now, Kevin Jennings, the quarterback for SMU, has been amazing. He's done a great job filling in and going in and being named the starter. He is now 9-1 as a starting quarterback. He was 9-0 prior to the game against Clemson in the ACC title. But he holds the ball. And what he wants to do is he wants to create. He wants to let things develop. He also is pretty good on the move. So he's a guy that naturally is very accurate when things are a little chaotic. One other thing with Kevin Jennings is he likes to drift backwards in the pocket a little bit too much. So if he's drifting backwards in the pocket, that's going to invite problems against these defensive ends for Penn State. And against Clemson, he held the ball for about 3.24 seconds before he got rid of it. That's way too long. That's way too long. Against other great pass rushes, he was getting it out much, much quicker. Like, for instance, against Pitt, he got it out in under 2.6 seconds. It needs to look a little bit more like the game against Pitt and a little less like the game against Clemson. So we know Penn State, pressure quarterbacks, on about 43% of the dropbacks. That's top 10 in the FBS. So this offensive line for SMU is going to have to hold up. And Kevin Jennings, he can help that offensive line a lot with how he moves in the pocket and how quickly he gets rid of the football. Question number 2, can SMU's passing game attack Penn State's secondary? As a result of all the pressure that Penn State can apply, most teams are not really capable of just stretching the field. When you look at how teams have attacked Penn State, opposing quarterbacks are averaging just 6.2 ADOT, average depth of target. So 6.2 average depth of target, yards downfield, is really, really short. So Penn State, the quarterbacks know these edge rushers can kill me. I better get rid of it. So I'm getting out so fast, my guys can't get down the field. That 6.2 ADOT is the second fewest against any FBS team this year. Only Ohio State has fared better. That was at 6.1 ADOT this year. Now, Kevin Jennings really excels on the intermediate passing game. Throws that travel about 11 to 20 yards downfield, that's when he's at his best. He completes around 62% of those passes, but they love to spread the ball around. If you look at it, it's kind of anyone's guess with SMU who's going to lead them in receiving on that given day. They have a bunch of really capable weapons: Keyshawn Smith, Jordan Hudson, Roderick Daniels, Rashard Smith. More on him in just a moment. But they have a bunch of really good weapons that they want to involve. They believe that they have as many as 7 different guys that can potentially take over the game, and you'll see all those guys get touches in their first 20 offensive snaps if all things go according to plan. Roderick Daniels has about 600 yards, but tons of help. Hudson and Smith both have 5 touchdowns apiece, but they have 5 pass catchers with 300 plus yards and 4 touchdowns. So they love to spread it around. These guys do a really good job, and they're going to have to take some shots because against Penn State, opposing teams have attempted just 7 passes, 30 or more yards downfield. That's the fewest against any FBS team. Now, that's a testament to the pass rush, but it's also a testament to, man, we don't know if we can win downfield against this secondary. One other issue for SMU were drops. They weren't all season long, but against Clemson, the biggest stage that they played in this year, they had way too many issues. They dropped 7 passes in the ACC championship game. They had just 6 leading into the ACC title. So 6 drops in their first 12 games, 7 in the ACC championship game. You cannot continue to give plays away like that because against Penn State, they are more capable of capitalizing. Question number 3, which versatile weapon takes over the game? Guess what? They have them on both sides. We'll start with Penn State, though, because I think Tyler Warren is probably one of the best, if not the best, pound-for-pound football player in the country. He's certainly in the conversation. He could be a very difficult matchup for SMU. He's their tight end, but he does a lot of different things for him. They can play him outside. They can line him up as a wildcat quarterback. They can line him up end of the line. They can line him up in the slot. They do a lot of things for Tyler Warren, and he could be a huge problem for Penn State's offense working against SMU's defense. He's 6'6". He's got 615 yards after the catch. He's one of just 2 tight ends in the country that have gone over 1,000 yards this year. And SMU, for as good as they've been defensively, they are in the bottom 15 in receptions, receiving touchdowns, and first downs allowed to opposing tight ends this year. Why is that? Well, when you look at SMU, their linebackers not overly long. They don't have guys that are 6'3", 6'2" at linebacker or at safety. So therefore, 6'6" Tyler Warren is going to have plenty of opportunity to win against guys that are a little bit on the shorter side. Now, they're physical and they can run and they'll hit and they're great players, but they're not overly big. That's an advantage for Tyler Warren and this Penn State offense as a whole. So SMU struggled there this year. On the other side, though, while Tyler Warren's elite for Penn State, Rashard Smith is elite for SMU. He's one of 3 running backs that scare me to death in the passing game this year. Cam Skattebo at Arizona State is one. Jeremiah Love at Notre Dame is the other. Rashard Smith at SMU is the third. Not only is Rashard Smith a wide receiver, He is a wide receiver, played receiver his whole life at Miami before transferring to SMU this year, and in the spring switched positions to running back. So he's become a very dependable runner between the tackles, but he still possesses that big playability if you motion him out of the backfield and turn him into a slot receiver. That could be a huge issue for Penn State's defense because of some of the mismatches that he can create. Question number 4, can Penn State's run game get going? We know Katron Allen. We know Nicholas Singleton. They're the only FBS pair to each rush for 2,500 yards over the last three seasons. They're one of 6 FBS tandems and the only one in this year's college football playoff to each rush for 800-plus yards here in 2024. We know those guys will be featured in this offensive plan from Andy Kotelnicki. That goes without saying. It's just, will there be enough space to allow them to operate at their highest possible level? Because SMU's run defense, you would think SMU not great defensively. That is not the case. Against the run, they're excellent. 2.7 yards per carry given up. That's 3rd in the country. 93 rushing yards a game given up. That's 4th. And 4.7 yards per play given up. That's 9th. So this is a really good group against the run. So it'll be on Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton and this offensive line for Penn State to open up big enough holes to give them room to work. Question number 5, if Penn State can't run it, can they attack a questionable secondary? Because I think Drew Aller has played really well this year. I really like him. I think he's done a nice job. I still think Penn State wants to be a team that pounds the football. I still think Penn State's a team that wants to be creative with their offensive plan. But if it comes down to it, if creativity is not working and they can't pound it, can they win on the outside against the SMU secondary, which has been good but unspectacular? And I would argue that their weakest link is their cornerback unit. Teams like Louisville, teams like Clemson, they've been able to take advantage of these corners in one-on-one situations. They found a lot of success in the passing game at times. This is an SMU secondary that has picked off just one pass corner this year. So that is something worth noting, that this is a group that might play great against the run, but could struggle in one-on-one on the outside. And then finally, last question, can Penn State hammer down in the second half? This game might be close early. It very well could be. Wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. But Penn State has been a team that has played their best football in the 3rd and 4th quarters. They're as good a closer as there is in the sport. They are plus 133 in the second half. That's the 5th best in the FBS. They're allowing just 5.3 points per game in the second half. That's the 3rd best in the FBS. And they have outgained their opponents by nearly 1,300 yards in the 3rd and 4th quarters. Only Miami has been better this year. So if it's close at halftime, can Penn State put the hammer down and shut things down for SMU there in the second half? I look at this game and I could see it going a lot of different ways. I would not be surprised whatsoever if SMU is in it around the midway point, but I'll take Penn State right now. I also think it has a chance to be a very high-scoring affair. I know people will look at the weather. They'll think SMU is not acclimated to handle that. I think they'll score. I just think Penn State will score more. So I'll take the Nittany Lions in a high-scoring affair. The Clemson Tigers, no stranger to the college football playoff, will travel to Austin, Texas. This game will be 4 o'clock Eastern time on TNT and on Max on Saturday. Texas is a 12-point favorite. The total is 52. It's the first meeting between these schools in football, which is kind of interesting, is it not? Clemson reached the college football playoff as the highest-ranked team. This is the 5th highest-ranked conference champion, which I think is wild to think about, that the 16th ranked team in the country is in the field, but that's the way the format works, and Clemson is back in business. Texas enters the CFP as the highest ranked at-large team. They, of course, lost the SEC championship game to Georgia. This is Texas's 2nd straight CFP appearance. They lost to Washington last year in the semis, but Clemson has made the college football playoff 7 times. That's the 2nd most by any team behind Alabama. They've won 2 national championships in 16 and in 18, so they are looking for their 3rd this year, which would tie Alabama for the most by any school. Before we get into the questions here, there's a few pieces of familiarity here in this game that I found a little bit fascinating. Now, Dabo Swinney's obviously been patrolling the sideline as the head coach for the Clemson Tigers for a very long time. They're going to meet with Steve Sarkisian, the head coach of the Texas Longhorns, but they've gone against each other before. I don't know if you remember this, but in 2016, Alabama's offensive coordinator throughout the season was Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin, after the semifinal game, decided to go to FAU, which means Steve Sarkisian, who was actually on the staff that year, he was thrust into the offensive coordinator position in the interim, coached the 2017 national championship game. That was the game that Clemson won on the last second touchdown pass to Hunter Renfrow, but Steve Sarkisian was the one calling the plays in that game. So little interesting there. And then taking it one step further, Cade Klubnik, stop me if you heard this before, he's from Austin, Texas. Imagine that. The game's going to be played in Austin. Oh my goodness. All right, it's not that big a deal, but kind of interesting nonetheless, especially knowing that Cade Klubnik, who went to Austin Westlake High School, he's playing against Quinn Ewers, who went to South Lake Carroll, which, in my opinion, is the best high school in the world. Of course, that's where I went, but don't tell anybody. They played each other in the Texas 6A Division I state championship at the end of the 2020 season. Klubnik went a ridiculous 20 of 22 for 220 and a touchdown with 2 rushing scores. Ewers had a couple picks in the game, and Klubnik ultimately went on to win the state championship over Quinn and the South Lake Carroll Dragons. One other piece of familiarity, Andrew Makuba, who's a starting safety for the Texas Longhorns, was with Clemson for 3 years before transferring to Texas here this past season. So he was the ACC Rookie of the Year back in 2021 and was all ACC for a couple seasons there with the Tigers. So a bunch of familiarity. For teams that have never played each other, there's a lot of familiarity on both sides of the coin. Let's start with the first question. Can Texas run the football? Now, when Texas runs the football, they win. And their 2 losses this year, both to Georgia, they couldn't protect and they couldn't run the football. They had 28 rushes for 31 yards in the SEC championship game. That's only a modest improvement over the 27 rushes that they had for 29 yards the first time they played the Georgia Bulldogs. In their other 11 games, they're averaging 189 rushing yards a game, including 50 carries for 240 against Texas A&M in the final game of the regular season. In Clemson's 3 losses this year, they just so happen to be their 3 worst games as far as yards per carry is concerned. Against Georgia, they gave up 6.26. Against South Carolina, they gave up 6.36. And against Louisville, they gave up 7.78. So if Texas can run the football and Clemson can't stop the run, that will go a long way into helping the Longhorns create separation between them and the Tigers. Question 2. Can Clemson win some one-on-ones on the outside? Now, this is one area in which I think Clemson's improved by leaps and bounds from where they were last year. That's at wide receiver. They brought in 2 big-time freshmen in Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore. Those 2 are in the top 7 in receiving yards amongst freshmen. They have been outstanding all season long, and the best part is those 2 guys are number 2 and number 3 in the pecking order for the Clemson Tigers because Antonio Williams, he's number 1. He has done a great job all season long on downfield throws. He's done a great job operating in the slot. He's number 0, and he's going to create some problems for the Texas secondary. Wesco's been amazing. So has TJ Moore, but Antonio Williams is still the straw that stirs the drink. But Wesco probably going to be the deep ball guy. He led the ACC in receiving yards on downfield throws. So that will be something worth monitoring. Clemson's probably going to have to create some big plays, and they're going to have to probably win some one-on-ones on the outside with a relatively young receiving core catching passes from Cade Klubnik. Question number 3. Can Texas's passing game create some chunk yardage? Now, Quinn Ewers does not take a ridiculous amount of shots downfield. He's kind of lived by just taking short underneath throws. He averages just 6.6 air yards per attempt, so the average depth of target is just 6.6 yards. That's the 5th shortest among the 126 qualified FBS quarterbacks. So he makes his living at or around the line of scrimmage. In fact, 200 of his 352 attempts are within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. So think about that. Nearly 60% of his throws don't travel more than 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. But when they do, a lot of times they're going in the direction of Matthew Golden, who is their most effective downfield weapon. On throws that travel 20 plus yards downfield, they've thrown 13 his way. He's caught 7, and 3 of those 7 catches have gone for touchdowns. The rest of the team has just 2. So he is going to be very, very important if and when they do decide to open it up, it'll probably be going in the direction of Matthew Golden. Question number 4, can Cade Klubnik neutralize the talent advantage? Let's just acknowledge what it is here. Texas has better personnel at this point. They have more high-level, fully developed players. But I think a lot of people would probably lean in favor of Cade Klubnik when evaluating the quarterback situation, because Cade Klubnik has actually been a little more consistent this year than Quinn Ewers, who has battled some injuries and has had a few ups and downs. Now, Cade Klubnik's had an outstanding season. He's got 33 touchdown passes, third most in the FBS behind Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. So he's done a really nice job. How do you create an advantage when a talent gap exists? You just have to manufacture big plays. You have to manufacture big plays. You have to manufacture chunk yardage. You got to kill Texas with a guillotine, not with 1,000 paper cuts. All right, Clemson has a 129 explosive plays this season. That's rushes of 10 plus and throws of 20 plus. That's how we qualify explosives. Everyone qualifies them differently. We do 10 plus yard rushes, 20 plus yard passes, and those 129, that's the 9th most in the FBS and the 2nd most in the ACC. Only Miami has more in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But one area in which Klubnik really has excelled this year is on the deep ball. On throws that travel 20 plus yards downfield, he's 30 of 66. That's one of 4 FBS quarterbacks this year with 30 plus completions on those throws, to go along with Syracuse's Kyle McCord, who has a ton of attempts, Ole Miss's Jackson Dart, and Charlotte's Deshaun Purdy. So I think this is a part where actually I think Clemson can create some opportunities down the field against Texas's corners and against their DBs. Question 5, can Clemson's pass rush get home? Against Louisville and Georgia, those were their worst pass rushing games they've played. They registered just 5 pressures against Georgia in week 1. That was the fewest on the season. And they got pressure on just 23% of Tyler Shuck's dropbacks when they played against Louisville. That was their 2nd worst rate of the season. Against Georgia, Texas, their pass protection, they struggled. Both times they played against Georgia, they really struggled protecting Quinn Ewers and whoever was back there at quarterback. In their 2 games against Georgia, they gave up 46 pressures. Against everyone else, they gave up 89 pressures. So to think about the fact that 11 games played, 89 pressures, about 8 a game, and against Georgia in those 2 games, they gave up 46. That's 23 in those 2 games. That's a huge problem. So can Clemson's pass rush get home? And the guy that I'd be looking to create that pass rush would be TJ Parker. He wears number 3 for the Clemson Tigers. And question number 6, will Texas's defense be forced to ramp up their aggressiveness? Like this Texas defense, they're a boa constrictor. Once they get around the victim, they slowly but surely constrict to the point that it squeezes the life out of you. They don't blitz. This is not a team that ramps up the pressure and starts bringing heat from all over the place. They're extremely sound with what they want to be defensively. We know what they're going to be as far as their coverages are concerned. They want to play mostly quarters where it's 4 deep zones that are accounted for by the 2 safeties and the outside corners. They're going to try to keep the ball in front of them. They're going to play zone coverage 2/3 of the time. That's the 3rd highest rate in the SEC. They have really leaned on their defense all season long. And while so much of the attention gets paid to Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian, it's been Pete Kwiatkowski's defense that has Texas in this position the last couple of years. They're ranked in the top 3 in the FBS in pretty much every major defensive category. The only teams that have scored 20 plus points on Texas this year was Georgia twice and Vanderbilt. Texas is the only team this season to not allow 350 or more yards in any game. And they forced 2 turnovers in 8 straight games. That's the longest streak in the SEC since LSU, 12 straight from 2012 to 2013. Pick in the game. I'm taking the Texas Longhorns. I think it's going to be one-sided. I think this thing gets out of hand. I think it's a bad matchup for Clemson. I think Texas will force Clemson to take the underneath stuff. They'll rally up. And then when the field condenses in the red zone, Clemson's going to have a really difficult time running the football. Unless Phil Maffa reverts back to who he was in the first 8 or 9 games of the year, I cannot envision Clemson having a lot of success running the football. I think they'll try to run Cade Klubnik, but I don't know how successful it will be. And I think Texas is too disciplined along the defensive front to allow quarterback draw to hurt them the way it's hurt some of Clemson's teams that they've played against this year. I think Texas wins this thing going away. I just don't know if Clemson will be able to score to keep up. I also think it has a chance to be low scoring. I'll take Texas in a one-sided affair against the Clemson Tigers. And then finally, the last playoff game that we need to break down, and maybe the most intriguing, is the Tennessee Volunteers at the Ohio State Buckeyes. This line is about 7.5. The total is 46.5. It'll be 8 o'clock Eastern time on ABC. Just the second time these two teams have played. They played in the 1996 Sugar Bowl. They played in the 1996 Citrus Bowl. That was the 95 season. That was Peyton Manning at quarterback, Eddie George at running back for Ohio State. And the Volunteers ended up winning that game 22-14. Now, the Buckeyes are back in the college football playoff for the 6th time. That's the 3rd most of any school. Only Alabama and Clemson have made it more often than the Buckeyes. But Ohio State is looking to win their first national championship since 2014. The Tennessee Volunteers are newcomers to the CFP. They're looking for their first national title since 1998. And of course, when you got SEC against Big Ten, what more could you possibly want? Over the last 5 years, the SEC is 15-8 against the Big Ten in all games and 12-5 against the Big Ten in the postseason. So worth noting there, if you have a lean based on conference affiliation, maybe you would be leaning a little bit in favor of Tennessee. Ohio State, meanwhile, has not beaten an SEC team since 2014. That's when they beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl in the college football playoff semifinal, and they went on to win the national championship. They've lost their last 3 games against the SEC. All of those games have taken place in the postseason. Question number 1. Can Ohio State's offensive line neutralize the line of scrimmage? This has been a big topic of debate, right? The O-line for the Buckeyes is without question their biggest weakness heading into the college football playoff. The unit has had some challenges ever since they lost Josh Simmons there in the season-ending injury against Oregon. He was the left tackle. So since week 7, they have been really inconsistent with their pass protection. They haven't really been able to move people off the ball with the same regularity, and they have potentially found a bit of a cohesion, but let's take into account who they might be playing against. This is going against an elite Tennessee defensive front. I think it's the best defensive front that Ohio State has seen on the edges. I think Michigan was better on the interior, but I think with the edges and the interior combined, this might be the toughest challenge for Ohio State this year. James Pierce is a one-man wrecking ball on the left side. Could play on the right as well, but he's one of the most dynamic pass rushers in the country. He can win with speed, he can win with power, and he needs to be neutralized if the pass protection is going to hold up for Will Howard. Question number 2. There's been a lot of talk about the Ohio State offensive line. But can we for a moment just talk about the Tennessee offensive line? No, I think they're rock solid. Guard to guard, I think they're rock solid. Okay, they play hard. They're physical. I think they have a good understanding of who they are. I think their style helps, the tempo that they've utilized at times, that helps guard to guard. But I do think their tackles are a bit of a liability, especially when it comes to pass protection. Lance Hurd at left tackle, John Campbell at right tackle. They have loads of penalties. Campbell at right tackle has 11 penalties on him this year alone. Now those tackles are going to be working against Jack Sawyer, who I think's had a really nice season. And Ohio State's gotten a little bit more creative with their looks down the stretch. They can give you some different variety. They can give you some looping and some pressures and some blitzes and buying offensive linemen and attacking specific parts of the opposing offensive line that they think they have an advantage against. I bet you anything they try to attack the tackles in this game. And I also think Tennessee is going to have some challenges with what they're going to face from this Ohio State defensive front. Question number 3. Can Tennessee effectively run the football? Dylan Sampson is probably as good of a running back that no one really talks about in the entire sport. The guy's gone for over 1,400 yards this year. He's actually nearing 1,500. He's got 1,485. And Tennessee's running the ball more than 50% of the time. So 53% of their offensive snaps, they're handing it off. That's the 21st highest rate in the FBS. That's a huge shift from what Josh Heupel has been in the past. But what Tennessee does is it's all RPO-based offense. So they basically force you to make a decision defensively. If you want to walk guys into the box, they'll throw it on you. If you want to keep guys out wide, they'll run it on you. The teams that have had the most success against Tennessee this year are the teams that did not stack the box. They just stopped it with their interior 6, their 2 linebackers and their 4 down defensive linemen. Teams that really shut them down, Georgia, Arkansas, those 6 players played great against Tennessee, and they kind of kept Dylan Sampson and this rushing attack in check. They will also utilize Nico Iamaleava in the run game as well. Pretty good on the zone reads, pretty good on the scramble drill. So he is another guy that Ohio State will have to account for in the run game to slow down this rushing attack. Question number 4. Can Will Howard and these wide receivers carry this team to victory? Now, Will Howard coming into the season was thought to be kind of the biggest question mark, right? I think when you look at how he performed for a vast majority of the year, he's been great. When he's been protected, he's played very well. People will look and nitpick the Michigan game. I don't think he played well against Michigan, but I don't think he was alone in playing poorly against the Wolverines. So I would expect him to bounce back in this performance and to play a little bit better against a group at the second level and in certain spots that I think you can take advantage of. I do think the Ohio State wide receivers against the Tennessee secondary has a chance to be one of the best matchups in the entire game. You look at Jeremiah Smith against Jermod McCoy, that's a big-time matchup. I think Jermod McCoy is super physical. I think he's great with his eyes. And I think Jeremiah Smith, who has excelled in making contested catches all year, this will be a step up in the level of physicality he's likely going to face when he tees it up against Jermod McCoy. But I think with his length, Jeremiah Smith is still an outrageously difficult cover. So it'll be very interesting to see who wins that matchup. Not to be overshadowed, though, is Carnell Tate on the other side working against Ricky Gibson. Now, Ricky Gibson hasn't been quite as good as Jermod McCoy, but he's been rock solid. And when things haven't been going for their other 2 wide receivers, how many times this year has Carnell Tate stepped up to the plate and hit a grand slam? He's been very, very good when taking advantage of the secondary cover man, or in some cases, the tertiary cover man for the opposing defense. Then the one that might be the most impactful in this game. We're going to spend a ton of time on Carnell Tate, a ton of time on Jeremiah Smith, but the guy that needs to be talked about in this matchup in particular is Emeka Egbuka. He's going to be going against Boo Carter. Boo Carter's a freshman, and I think he's going to have his hands full against one of the best slot receivers in the country. That's a matchup that Ohio State can and should win rather convincingly. Egbuka against Carter. And if I'm Will Howard, that's a matchup that I'd be looking to take advantage of early and often throughout the game. Question number 5. Will Tennessee's passing attack hit some shots downfield? Now, I think that's a little bit of a misconception with how good Nico's been as a thrower this year. As a quarterback in general, he's been fine, but it's been a bit of a work in progress. Just so you have a comparison, in 2023, the quarterback for Tennessee was Joe Milton. His total QBR was 69.7. So not bad, but certainly not at the top, middle of the pack there in college football. Well, this year in 2024, Nico Iamaleava's quarterback rating, QBR, is 70.5. So he's only 0.8 points higher than Joe Milton was a year ago in total QBR. Iamaleava has 5 wins this year in which he threw for less than 200 yards. That's the most by any SEC quarterback this season. I think Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, Chris Brazzell, those will be the 3 wide receivers he turns to. But the good news is with Tennessee's passing attack is all it takes is one. If he can hit one downfield throw, that changes the way you want to play this group defensively. If he can find some opportunities, work in the middle, that would be huge because a lot of this offense will break towards the middle because of the influence that the play action could have on the safeties and the dedication from safeties to stopping the run. So I don't think Nico has to be spectacular, but he does have to hit 1 or 2 shots downfield. Those might result in 14 points, and 14 points might be all you need to potentially win this game. And then question number 6. If the Buckeyes get off to a slow start, will their fans turn on them? This has been a question that's been asked time and time and time again. I've been around Ohio State enough to know that while their fans expect greatness, their players do too. Their coaching staff does too. I think that this Ohio State group is still remarkably loyal, and I think they're going to create a very hostile environment for the Tennessee Volunteers. Yes, everybody's mad about Michigan. Yes, everybody's had a bad taste in their mouth the last few weeks, but guess what's still very much a possibility for this team here a few games from now is an opportunity to win the national championship. I still think Ohio State will 100% be behind their players and their coaches, and while the Michigan loss hurts, it can be avenged with a great run throughout the postseason. So question number 6, I'll answer it for you. I think it's ridiculous. But if the Buckeyes get off to a slow start, it will be something worth monitoring in the game. The trend in the game, Tennessee has lost 21 straight road games against top 10 teams. Their last win came at number 10 Georgia in 2006. This is the 4th longest active streak among power conference teams. Indiana, by the way, has a streak similar, and it's the longest streak for Tennessee in program history. I'm taking Ohio State in the game. I'm actually going to lay the points. I also think it's going to be a low-scoring affair. I think way too much attention has been paid to the shortcomings of Ohio State in their most recent game. And not enough attention is being paid to the great moments that Ohio State had throughout the other 11 games of the season. I think we see Ohio State's best in this performance. I think Ryan Day knows they need it. I think the defensive plan will slow down an offense that has at times been a little bit inconsistent. And I think their defensive front will take advantage of the edges of the offensive line for Tennessee and create a lot of problems for Nico Iamaleava. I like Ohio State to win this game comfortably, and I also think their defense will slow down Tennessee in the process. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show wherever you get the show. We really look forward to watching these games this weekend. We think you guys are going to love what's in store for us here as college football fans. The first time we see games in home field environments. I mean, what gets better than that? And to make things even sweeter, there might be snow in the forecast in South Bend, Indiana to kick things off, the first ever home playoff game, and we might have snow on the ground. It's going to be incredible. So we hope you guys are as excited as we are. It should be a great weekend of college football. We will be here on Sunday to break down what we witnessed in those 4 playoff games. Probably sprinkle in a little bit more bowl coverage as well, based on what goes down in the days to come. But we hope that you'll continue to come back here where we give you the most comprehensive and in-depth breakdowns in the college football world as a media, I think, as far as media is concerned. So we hope that you guys enjoy it. We know we enjoy it. We hope that you feel prepared now to watch these games this weekend, and we hope that you're as excited as we are. So for all of us here at Always College Football, from Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day, and remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.